I have to begin by saying I don't know the answer to your question about the status of poetry and why it is obviously so poorly funded and so low in the priorities of education, public and private at this point. Feeling is that it goes back certainly throughout my 5 or 6 years as a professional teacher. I found very little interest in poetry when I was at grade school, and those of us who were interested were thought of as sissies. Whether we thought of ourselves as that yet or not, I don't think so. I didn't. I noticed even in prep school that the whole point of getting a very strong education in formal aspects of poetry was to make us qualified to go to college, to fine universities. One of the major reasons in public education that it died, and it didn't take long for it to die, because if it dies for one generation, it's really dead for the ones who teach it to the next generation. So it's been a long time since anyone, even majoring in English, has cared a whole lot about poetry. They'll tell you the truth. Most of them don't. They just skirt it. They don't teach it. Or if they do, they teach their few favorite verses, and that's it. I think the major way that poetry's been kept alive is a fairly sneaky one, and one in which you're involved, and big time, and that's through music. Most people who tell me they don't like poetry, if I get them to talk about it at all, have no idea how much poetry they consume, and how much poetry they like. And some of it's good, and some of it's awful, but that's okay too. Yeah, with anything, if you can't have an abundance of something so that you have a fair share of the awful too, you don't develop much of a share of anything. One of the things the British have done to keep poetry alive is through drama. Every British guy in the slums of London, where I taught, and they dropped out of school when they were 15, because that's when the school leaving age was in the 1960s. I don't know what it is now. They had no sense of love of poetry, but they might do T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral and be quite unimpressed that it was poetry. They were just impressed with it because it was good drama. It was murder in the cathedral. My goodness, how much better can you get? So I think another part is that we've lost a real sense of poetry as a human birthright. Our forebears did not come out of the cave saying ooga. They came out saying ooga, ooga, or ooga, ooga. There was repetition. There was a joy in the sound of their own voices, a joy in the length of what they said and how they repeated it, long before they had words to say. It's part of our gut. It's a very basic part of our human being. Both formal poetry and what we would today call informal poetry. Another piece of it, I think, is that we are a spiritless place on this planet right now, in many ways. Not terribly spiritual, and not terribly sensual either, except in rather crude and almost pornographic ways. We commercialize everything and put low value on anything. Let's roll all of our sweetness into one ball, said Andrew Marvell in a wonderfully erotic poem in which he's trying to persuade his mistress, who's being coy, which was a way of saying turning him down, but turning him on. He wants to roll all of his sweetness into one ball, and it's a gorgeous use of language to talk about the congruence of sex and love and beauty. I've really rarely found someone who didn't like that poem, if you ever got him to open up and listen at all. But it was pretty hard to get him to open up and listen. And probably even harder for them to take it away and talk to anybody else about it. So that's a long and rambling answer to your question. Remedies? I don't know. I sneak poetry into a lot of the stuff that I've done through my life. I found that in teaching and preaching, I could often read a poem, and as long as I didn't frame it as a poem, as long as the rhyme was enough that I could hide the rhyme pretty much, maybe until the final couplet or something, I could get away with it. I remember doing on Beecher's poems about the battle-souled people. Down here in Alabama, we love our Negroes. We wouldn't harm them for the world. All this violence you hear so much talk about is all about low-down rednecks, poor white trash. It's a lovely poem. I think it's even a sonnet, but I can't remember that for sure. If it's a well-done frame, you often don't need to remember what the frame is. It just holds the thing together for you silently, like wonderful anatomy does when you're making love. You don't really want to count your bones. Beecher, a great nephew of Henry Ward Beecher and Harriet Beecher Stowe, and his father was head of U.S. Steel, and he was a Catholic, so I mean he couldn't be outside of the most poor folks at the Alabama public school system that he attended. But he wrote a lot of poetry after he got kicked out of Berkeley during the McCarthy era for not signing the loyalty oath. Anyway, I wrote that poem to some student freshmen at Alabama, and I'd often have young magnolia blossoms, I call them, come up and tell me afterwards, "Oh, Mr. Crew, I didn't know you knew my grandmother," or "I didn't know you knew my mother." In other words, Beecher had gotten it down to an art form so that someone who didn't even realize it was an art form, didn't even realize they were listening to poetry, realized they were listening to their grandmama. So we've got to do that. If we want to save the world, or save a few people in it, which it's not our job to save the world. Jesus did that, and he's got a pretty poor score right now for most folks. If you want to find your life in art and in poetry, certainly I've done that. You have to love it because it's there. And the same reason they climb Mount Everest. It's just there. It's your birthright. Do it. Enjoy it. Find somebody who enjoys it too. That's fine too. One anecdote and I'll stop. I was giving a poetry reading at Callanwall, which is one of the families that founded Coca-Cola. And they have an estate out near Emory. And when Jimmy Carter was governor of Georgia, he established an award for poetry. We won the award that year from the Arts Festival at Callanwall Festival. I was at one of their readings. And a young man I taught in prep school back in 1959 or 60, Ed Darlington, came up to me afterwards. I didn't recognize him. I was so embarrassed. And I knew he had become a lawyer. His father was president of Berry Schools in Rome. He said, "Louie Crew, you're the reason I'm an English professor." I said, "You're an English professor?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "I thought you were Emory's lawyer." He said, "Well, I was, but I didn't like lawyering. It was so boring." And so I did a little inventory in my mind of all the teachers that I'd ever had and what they'd ever enjoyed. And he said, "I remember you kept coming back to the top of my list." And I don't ever believe what people tell you, because whenever they like something, they exaggerate it. I don't know that this is really true, but it was true for him. He remembered it. He said, "Came in early." Well, that I did always. "And you read a poem sticking your head into a Coca-Cola cup," which was nice for the Callanwalls, in the paper cup. I like to do that when I read things because it gives you an echo chamber, and it's back before microphones and all that fancy chalkboarding and stuff. He said, "You read an Emily Dickinson poem, and when you finished," and this is the part I know he's making up because I could never have done it then, said, "You jumped up flat-footed onto the desk and said, 'I wish I had written that.'" Well, I must have said I wish I'd written it. I said that for a lot of things. But that's the way he remembered it. It changed his life, he said. I'm not prepared to believe it's the only reason it changed his life. He had a lot of other things going for him in terms of his education and parents that liked literature and so on. But I think that's it. The key is, what do you really care enough about to jump up on the table and say, "I wish I'd written that"? Well, Jeffrey, I hope this helps. I always like chatting with you, and I'm sorry I don't have you chatting back with me.